Welcome to Unleashed, where MMA icon and power wrestling titan Dan
the Beast
Severn and Eric Carroll deliver a knockout punch of raw, unfiltered talk.
Unleashed.
Gear up. Gear up. It's beast mode.
I kind of like to know, who was Ken Shamrock before he was ever Ken Shamrock? Because, again, you have had an interesting childhood and stuff like that, to where I had the honor and pleasure of meeting Bob at one point in time. Again, I'm going to ask you some questions that, again, you can either say yay, nay, or just move on. Is Bob still around?
No, he passed away about 9 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Again, that was one of those things that going. I did not know, and I just know that what a good man, what a kind man, for all the things that he did for not just you, but just how many other were they typically always young men that he took on board, or did he take guys and gals both?
Yeah, he started up in Anza, California, back in probably, I would say, 1975, 76. And had a few kids there. He was driving a school bus, and he had a ranch for Arabian horses. And so he would take these kids on the bus, kind of a side thing, because he enjoyed working with kids. And so he got to a point to where he didn't want to drive the bus anymore. He actually got introduced to people that had worked with these at-risk kids. He thought it would be a great idea to bring a couple kids onto his ranch and maybe teach them how to work with horses and take care of other things besides, dealing with human beings all the time. And so he started out with a few kids. He had a couple girls, a couple guys, and started up in Anza. And then shortly after that, my mom, they adopted me. So when I call them mom and dad, they weren't at that time. They started bringing in kids, and then felt like this is what they wanted to do, and they sold their ranch and ended up moving into Susanville, California, where they opened a bigger home where they were housing 18 to 22 kids, young teenage boys that were at-risk kids. And when I say at-risk kids, I mean kids that had literally gone to a point to where they had been so bad that their last stop was the Shamrock Boys Home. And if they didn't make it there, then they would end up going to the kids' prison, California Youth Authority. And so he literally housed some of the hardest kids. But Bob Shamrock was the kind of guy who truly understood the human nature and human beings, especially kids, because all other group homes at other places were basically housing them and giving them these point systems and talking to them about changing and psychologically trying to evaluate them and all these things that were just useless because these kids were already damaged. Me being one of those kids, were already damaged. Like we had already been through this, and these things that happen to us, you cannot change. And so what he would do is that he would find out what it is that we did good or what we liked doing. Mm-hmm. And he would encourage us to do that, to be able to vent our anger and frustration into these positive things. For me, it was sports, because I was angry. I would always fight no matter what someone said to me. If they got in my face, I would end up fighting because I couldn't talk, because the minute I tried to talk, I'd start to cry. So instead of someone seeing me cry, I just hit them and just start fighting to avoid anybody seeing me get upset. And so after I got a little bit older and he taught me football and he got me into wrestling, I was able to vent that into something positive, and I became relevant now. All of a sudden I was important to certain people, coaches, and in high school, making sure I got good grades. And Dan, you know how that works, man. You get privileges because you're great at something, and they want to make sure you're getting the grades to get on the field or on the mat.
Yep.
And that's what happened to me. It turned around. But when people say, well, what if you're not an athlete? Well, the same thing happens because my mom was more involved with that, with the kids that were articulate. Like you see these rappers going out, whether we like it or don't like it, they're talking about all this stuff and this violence. It's their way of venting without actually doing it. They go out and they vent these things because it makes them, now all of a sudden they're feeling something relevant. Same thing with being somebody that's an architect. We had kids that went into architect because they were drawing these pictures when they were in school because they were damaged at that time, and they were drawing all these bodies and people getting killed and holding them up, and they would get sent home, and the teachers would say, you need to put them on some sort of medication because something's wrong with them. All they were doing was venting. And so you had to find something that they could do that would make them feel important, which is like drawing buildings, drawing these things, that now all of a sudden their drawing became relevant. And all they were doing was venting and getting smashed for doing that. And all my mom and dad did was take the things we did well, even though we were angry and frustrated, and put it into something that was more constructive and positive.
How many homes do you think that you were in and out of prior to making, because as you state that it was kind of like the last stop for you, how many homes were you in before?
I started out at 10 years old. I got locked up, and I actually got stabbed. That's how I got caught. I ended up in juvenile hall, and then from that time I went through 4 different placements, and ended up at the Shamrock Boys Home.
Wow.
At the time I was and that was when I was 13. So I went from 10 to 13 with four placements.
Wow. So we've got something in common, Ken. I was reading up on your bio, and correct me if I'm wrong. It says you was born in Warner Robins, Georgia. You was a military kid?
Yep. Yes, that's I was. Well, yeah, so, I was born on the base, but I was never a part of the military because didn't know who my father was up until I was probably 46, and then we found out.
Well, I mean, that's skipping a lot of stuff, but let me ask you about that. How did you end up meeting your father, and how did that go?
Yeah, well, my brother Robbie, who was the second oldest brother, I never grew up with my brothers. We were all put different places, so we were separated. My brother Robbie was in and out of prison. Then ended up his last stint, he was doing life in prison, attempted murder, just a lot of tough stuff. He ended up getting out because of the California law, where they passed it that you can't be tried for offenses that you'd already been convicted for. So it was like a 3 or 4 time strike for him, and so he was going to do life because of the 4th time, and he ended up getting out after doing, I believe, 17 years or something. And prior to that, he was in, so he was there for a while. But like I said, didn't grow up with my brothers or anything like that. They went separately. But I think that the journey for me was really being able to understand and getting an understanding of who I was, because without that, you're just floating out there in the middle of nowhere with absolutely no vision and no direction.
Yeah. Well, you hit the nail on the head there, Ken. I mean, everyone growing up, I had 7 other brothers and sisters. I mean, even though I was one of the pack right there, you're still looking for your individuality. It's whatever you're going to be recognized for what you do, Dad. And, just like yourself, I ended up getting involved in athletics, the sport of amateur wrestling. And that was fantastic. And, being a part of something to where they depended upon you to do your job, just like you depended upon them to do their job. And then sometimes kind of like you got to pick up the slack, because if we're losing, you may have to pick up a pin or something like that in order to help bring the score, flip-flop the score there just a little bit. So it's sports, I think, are a great part for anyone growing up, because, that is part of your surrogate family, whether it's playing a sport of football, wrestling, track and field, soccer, the whole 9 yards. But it also, I think it's a great physical outlet for especially young men that have pent up anxiety and things of that nature. It's an outlet. You said that you got into a lot of fights, stuff like that. I imagine. I always used to refer to the heavy bags. I'm inside my training facility. I'm chatting with you there. I always tell people that you look at that heavy bag as an outlet? I mean, instead of going home and beating your significant other or something of nature, just go out there and if you want to put a picture up there and then go crazy on that bag for the next 20, 30 minutes, knowing that bag's still gonna be hanging there.
Well, there's no repercussions on it either. Like, it's a great outlet for people that were more outward with their anger and frustration, and then of course ones that more introverted. There's other options, whether it's rapping or singing or being, drawing. There's just all kinds of different ways for people who don't come from the best of families, or no families at all, and they're angry, frustrated, and they hate the world. And just being able to direct them into something they feel like they're relevant because they're good at something, it goes a long ways in being able to have a different feeling about yourself.
Even the fact that Bob had the horses on there, because horses, animals, they can feel a certain vibe that people get off, and they can read people pretty quickly to know if they have anxiety and things of that nature. And I mean, animals are very kind. I'd say most animals are pretty kind. You always have that rogue animal every now and then, but it's kind of because I grew up on a farm. And you name the animal, we raised it all, except we did not have horses. Everything that we raised, it was going to end up on your dinner plate there at some point in time. So you learn real quickly not to give it pet names. And I even milked Peggy the milk cow for 8 years, knowing that when milk gave out on Peggy, well, Peggy was turned into hamburger, and everybody was going boo hoo hoo that morning. And my dad's like, well, Peggy never tasted so good. So
yeah, well, it definitely the thing that life shows you is that it's very difficult to get comfortable, whether it's with an animal, whether it's with a job, whether it's with anything. I mean, like, the minute you start getting comfortable with something and everything feels right, it changes. Things always are changing. So you always have to be able to adapt, or at least understand what you're getting into. Just like you said with the farm, right? I mean, you had to understand right from the get-go, like, don't get attached, right? Because, this isn't going to be around forever. Like for us, when we were on the ranch, it was an opportunity for us to take care of something, which is something that we never had to do other than taking care of ourselves, because nobody else was there for us. So now it was actually flipped to where we had to care, or at least we were tricked into caring. When I say tricked, it means the animals were there, and some guys would get attached to them. We had dogs, we had horses, so you would get attached to them, because we would feed the horses, we'd brush them out. And some guys would get attached to him. We had two Great Danes, and he'd wrestle with the dogs, and some guys would get attached to them. And so then all of a sudden, they start learning how to feel and care for something.
Right.
That's a lot easier to take care of than human beings, because human beings talk back. Human beings can turn on you. Animals are faithful. They're always going to love you. So It was really a good thing for us to be able to get attached to something and learn how to take care of something and learn how to love something, knowing that we weren't going to get hurt.
Yeah,
definitely makes sense.
That same routine though also makes you a more functional type of being, because I always tell people that my father used to say the animals eat twice a day. Well, he first said, son, he goes, do you like to eat? I go, well, yeah, Dad. He goes, so do the animals, twice a day, in the morning and at night. So you had to get up there earlier to take care of your chores. And then before you got taken care of, and you had to do it within a certain time frame, because you still got to catch the bus. And then later in life, when you finally got a chance to drive to school, that was I'll say it was a cool thing, but driving the family truck was not a cool thing, because you had to slide in from the passenger side, because if you opened up the driver's side, the door was probably going to fall off the hinges. So it wasn't the coolest thing to drive to work. But that was a whole different era where you used to have the gun rack, and you used to have guns in the gun rack, and you'd pull right into the parking lot. And it's like, think about in today's world, if they saw a kid drive in with a gun rack with guns into it, like people would be up in arms. But back in the 70s, that was normal at that point.
Yeah, everybody's sensitive now.
Ken, how many other boys were there at the ranch?
When I was there, we had anywhere from 24 to 20 kids. Most of the time it was around 20, 21, but every now and then we would squeeze in a couple more. My dad was well known throughout that industry in that era, which was, Napa, Vacaville, Sacramento, LA, San Diego, all that area, where he had the home. His home was considered the best because his success rate, 7%. It was unbelievable the amount of kids that ended up going home and doing well. And a lot, like I said, a lot of it had to just being able to have them understand who they are and what they were good at. And once they were able to latch onto that, then they could just take off and go and do the things that they love doing and making money at it. And so it was interesting because some of the things we used to do, because there was, that many kids there, my dad would always let us decide what punishments were. For instance, if something got stolen in the house, we would all go what we called the bunkhouse, which was where there was 8 beds. It was a big area. And that's usually where the new guys went when they came in. Now the other guys got rooms of 3 or 4. And so we would go in there and because of the way that we were able to siphon through when something got stolen, it was always somebody that was new, because the old guys already knew what was going to happen if something came up missing, and it would be a bunkhouse meeting, and we wouldn't come out of there until we found out who did it. And if you know anything, and I think most of us have been a part of some sort of group of people or men or women, and you always know what the other person's doing. Like somebody knows something when you're in that tight-knit kind of group. And so we would go in there and there would already be an idea of who we knew who did it. And there was a couple different times where people got their jaws broken. People got beat up. And people think when you hear it, they're like, man, you guys, that is just so wrong. And it's like, you got to understand who we are and where we come from. We come from the streets and we are the worst of the worst. And we're being now given an opportunity to be able to police ourselves and be able to get things done the way they're supposed to be getting done. And so when we would go in there, majority of the time, not all the time, we would go in there and we would point to the individual that did it. And that individual would almost 100% of the time say, yeah, it was me, because everybody knew it. But then there were those few times where there's 2 or 3 people that showed up, there would be, okay, one of them did it. And usually at the end of that meeting, and I'm not going to get into the details, every single time we came out with our guy. And after that, it never happened again.
So they saw the end results of witnessing what happened. So it's like it educates other people, like going, okay, if something like this goes down, this is some of the consequences that are going to happen. So
yeah,
educated.
Yeah, and there's 22 kids, 20 or 22 kids, and you're getting a few new ones that come in. You always know when things start to not go the direction that they're normally used to going. You know why. But it was, like I said, but at the same time, we backed each other. I mean, like we would go into town and it was us against the Cowboys, or it was us against the town people. We stuck together. We would play football against some of the college guys, because they had Lassen College out there, and we would play football on a Sunday afternoon against some of the wrestling team or the track team, or a mixture of both, and we would normally win because it was street ball, and that's what we were used to. But it was fun. Like I said, we would even get into fights where we would meet at the park. And like I said, there was probably like 20 of us, a minimum of 20 of us most of the time. We would show up at the park and we would get in fights with the Cowboys and some of the town people, or what they call the jocks, which I was both. And we would just get in a fight and we would throw down and beat each other up, and then it was over. Like, and the cops would let it go. They'd stay away from the park because there was nobody getting stabbed. There was nobody getting shot. There was nobody getting jumped. It was literally just guys going over there and just duking it out, and it was pure and it was fun. Nowadays, bro, you can't do that. It's crazy. Like, it's just like, from what it was and being in that home, I would have never been able to be who I am today if it wasn't for me being in that town and being able to be around that person, which is Bob and Dee Dee Shamrock, being able to give me the opportunity to be able to be who I was.
Is Dee Dee still around?
Yes, she actually lives in Modesto, and I actually talk to her all the time. So she's a big part of my life right now.
Okay, no, that's fantastic because when we first talked about Bob and knowing that he passed on about 8 years ago, I just wondered what his wife was, and so Dee Dee was his wife, and she had to be like an angel there too in order to again 20 some odd kids at a time, and I was wondering about before, but you kind of already addressed it. Did you have like a bunkhouse, something like that? So you did have you like a bunkhouse that had like you could accommodate like up to like 8, I think you said at that time, but then you had other rooms that would accommodate 3 or 4 people. So a lot of bunk beds, I imagine.
Yeah, there's most of the single or not single rooms, but the smaller rooms. You'd have one single bed and one bunk bed.
Yeah.
Oh wow. How many of you ended up taking on the Shamrock name? Was that all the kids?
No, it was myself. I was the first one, and then I think it was after Frank got out of prison. My dad brought him up because I was already fighting over in Japan, and I was just getting into the UFC. So we brought Frank in. My dad went and got him out of prison, brought him up, and he lived at my house. I gave him a car. A T-top, a Trans Am T-top, and so he had transportation. He lived at my house, and then we had a fighter's house, which was a separate thing. But Frank couldn't live at some of those places because he was an ex-felon, so he couldn't be at the boys' home that we had, and he couldn't really be in a business at that time. So he lived with me and lived upstairs. I had a 2-story house, and so he lived up there for probably a year and a half before we got him into the fighter's house. But he had to earn it. And he did. He earned it. And so then we put him into the fighter's house, and that's when he started his career.
Okay, that definitely makes sense. Like going back to this, hearing some of the trouble and stuff you was getting in before you went to the Shamrock house, how long did it take you to kind of let go of some of those bad habits that you had once you got inside with Bob?
It was gradual. It's hard to explain to people that don't have that I guess the disease or cancer or whatever you want to call it inside of you that you've grown to be broken because of all the stuff you go through, and lies that's been told to you, and just everything, and the abuse, the divorces, the anger and frustration that you're seeing generate through that separation several times, getting in the system where you're around people who just hate the world. It just took it. I got the Shamrock Boys Home, and it was a gradual process because even my first day of school, I literally got into a fight in high school. It was my first time going to school because I was always in placement, and I was in a special ed class because I didn't know how to do add or subtract. I could add one number, but if I had to, which I didn't know how to carry numbers or any of that, I was 13 years old. And I had kindergarten reading, and I had no math skills. I knew nothing because I was constantly always either getting in trouble, or I was locked up, or I was in a group home and I'd run away, and I was going through transition. So I didn't really have any continuous education. So I got into high school, being in special ed, people make fun of you. They don't know who I am. And then I punch them in the mouth and I'm suspended. Because I didn't know how to deal with anything any other way. If you talk smack to me, I'm hitting you. Like, that's just it. I didn't know anything else. And so it took some time for Bob to be working with me to help me understand that not everybody's after you. People say things all the time, but they're not saying them because they hate you. They're saying it because they hate themselves, or they're saying it because they're insecure or they've got problems, not you. So you need to sometimes just let it go. And I had a hard time doing that. But after a while, because I became good at football and good at wrestling, it felt like I didn't have to prove myself now because I was out there proving it other ways. Like I became relevant and popular because I was this athlete, and everybody looked at me, and they looked at me in this way where I felt like, I was important by the way that they were looking at me. And I never got that look. It was always looking at me like I was beneath them, like I was this punk kid. And all of a sudden it started to change. And once I started getting that confidence that I could do this and like that, I don't need to be that other thing. I don't have to do that because I'm standing out in a way that's more positive than I ever have before. And so I just embraced it. And I realized early on that nobody's doing this to help me. They're doing this to help themselves. They're doing this because they're going to get something from me that's going to help them become better at their jobs or better at what they're doing, like coaching, like winning championships. I'm giving that to them. They're using me and nurturing me and coddling me to do those things. But once it's over, I realize this, there's no relationship there. They're not my buddy. They're there because they're getting something from me. And I realized that. And I thought, well, if they're doing that and wanting something from me, I want something from them. And I want to be able to get people to help me understand and work to where I can get into mainstream courses. I want to learn. I want to know why I'm not with these other kids in regular classes, and I want to get there. And if I'm going to play these sports and I'm going to do these things, I want you guys to give me somebody to help me get where I need to go as far as, education, because I knew my next step was college. And in order for me to get to college, I got to be able to pass those SATs. And I was nowhere near that. And so probably my junior year is where I realized I could use them the same way they were using me.
Yeah. Well, okay. When you hear about like the people gangs picking on people, things of nature, we've got this new era with the cyber world, where anyone can hide behind whatever fictitious name or something like that, and they can just slam you with a comment here or comment there. And again, it's not even that person. They'll have a fictitious name or things of that nature. What do we think like? It's referred to as cyber bullying. What do you think about cyber bullying?
Hang on a second. I lost my earpiece.
That's okay. Kind of playing off of that, Dan, I noticed not long ago they just had the Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk fight. And I try not to read the comments because people have just become so ridiculous. But after that fight, I go in, I see all these comments of these people talking about how big of a bum Tyson Fury is and how they can beat him. I'm like, this guy was the undefeated, heavyweight champion of the world. And you got all these little trolls going online. I mean, being able to hide behind that computer screen and that profile name makes some of these guys 10 feet tall, and they wouldn't last, 10 seconds in the ring with a Tyson Fury.
That's, to play off of what you're talking about the cyberbullying stuff like that. I always got into my office before. I had another gentleman that worked in the office there with me. He come in, he did a lot of repetitious typing, adding things to the database, stuff like that for me. And I always got into the office before he did. Well, one day I got in there late, and I walk in, and his face is pale. It's just white as a ghost. And his first name was Mark. I go, Mark. I go, well, what's wrong? He goes, your answer machine. And I go, oh, I said, well, we'll play it. Well, basically, there was like a death threat. Okay. So there's the death threat. I go. So I'm sitting over at the other desk, and he plays it. I go, I'll bet that came in somewhere between midnight and probably 3-4 o'clock in the morning. And he looks at the time and goes, how'd you know? I go, when do the bars let out? Okay. So he got the bars let out. He's got his liquid encouragement. I go, the dumbass just left us a message with his phone number. Call him back up and say, well, Dan can't kill you today or tomorrow. He's kind of busy. He's got other people he's got to kill these days. But he can squeeze you next week on a Wednesday or something like that. I go, otherwise, hit the delete button and move along. I go, and he's like, because I've seen numbers of them come in, but it's usually someone that's got the what I call the beer goggles on. They're feeling strong. It's like, delete, go on.
You can't control the keyboard warriors. They're going to do what they do. But it's kind of like, when you're whether it's NBA, NFL, hockey, whatever it is, you cannot control the fan base. You've got to be able to roll with whatever's being done, because the one thing that I think that you have to understand is that the fan base is what makes us who we are. We are relevant because of our fan base. Yes. And yes, there are going to be some of them out there. And Dan, you and I know this very well, that we're going to get ones that just hate us just to hate us. There is no rhyme or reason other than they just want to hate us. And they're going to say and do things to us no matter what we do. And so I think that what, like you said, the one thing is that you have the ability to be able to talk and deal with the ones that you want to deal with. And I don't mind people coming in and having a claim on me, or to, put me down, saying something, if they've got something to back it up. If they're just saying I'm an ass, or they don't like me and I'm a dick and that I'm horrible, or I'm the worst ever. Okay, why? Don't just tell me I'm that. If you have a legitimate beef with me, tell me, and we'll try to fix it. But if you're just saying it because you're hating on me, then I got no time for you.
Yeah, no, I feel exactly the same way. But now let's mix MMA versus professional wrestling, because in professional wrestling, you're taking on a persona. And whether that persona is to be the baby face that's going to be liked by people, or be that heel that you're looking for those negative reactions. You want people to be booing and the whole nine yards. I mean, that's when did you get involved in professional wrestling, and what intrigued you to even get involved with it?
Yeah, I was, I want to say 88, 89, somewhere around there. I got with South Atlantic and North Atlantic Pro Wrestling. I was with Nelson Royal at first. That's where I got my first strap. I was about 6 months into the business. And then I did some time with Buzz Sawyer in Sacramento before I went to Nelson Royal. But that was a story in itself, because I would go up there from Reno to work with Buzz, and Buzz would take us out in the park, and he would have us just kind of do like amateur wrestling, and I rolled with Buzz a little bit, and Buzz is a stud, and I ended up going with him and ended up getting him, but it took me probably 5 or 6 minutes straight, and he just gassed. And I was young, I was strong. I'd done a few tough mans and won some tough mans. I had a wrestling background, and I was pretty good at that after even breaking my neck. But Buzz was the guy that I think, when got to a certain point, because he was going over to Japan at the time, that he would bring guys into this racquetball club, and we'd go into the racquetball area and he'd have these mats down, and he would have guys come in on the weekend, and they would pay anywhere from $600 to $1,200 for a tryout, and he would have me beat them up and make him quit. And then he would say, some of them would go, I want him to pass. And the guy would be probably 180 pounds dripping wet, and say, I want that guy to pass. I didn't know why. I said, all right. So I'd roll with them and go easy on them, and they would make it. And then some guys are built like horses, played, ex-football players, and even some guys that were already in the business, that came from either a wrestling background, a boxing background, or some sort of athletic background. And I would have to beat him up and make him quit. And I didn't understand it until later on when I realized that he was making me let these guys that were passing were guys that owned like plum shops, that car dealerships, guys that had money. He wanted them to pass because then he could get them to fund his business. And so I didn't know that until later on. But he would pay me probably $300. If someone paid $1,200, he'd give me $300. Someone paid $600, he'd give me $100. But we weren't learning anything. So that's when actually not me, but my father hunted down Nelson Royal, who was, out of Carolinas there. And he had actually had this tryout that was coming up. And my head with tryouts was already like, oh, they're going to try to get me to quit. Okay, we'll see how that one goes. So we go down to do the tryout. We paid $1,200 for a tryout. And so I'm thinking to myself, they got to have somebody. I know how it works, because I was one of the guys who was doing it for Buzz. So I was already on, and I was looking for the challenge. It wasn't necessarily passing. It was like, yeah, I want to shock these guys, man. And so I get in there. We run in these dirt clods, and they're gassing us out for about 2 hours. We go inside to Nelson's wrestling room, and all of a sudden this one guy walks in. He's about 260, 6'4". I realized right away he's probably an amateur wrestler. And so we go in there, and the first guy goes in there, and this guy just thumps him, just slams him all over the place. And we're tired, right? You know, we know how it works. And he slams him, and then he goes, Nelson goes, okay, go sit over there. And I was thinking to myself, wow, okay, I thought they would say, hey, sorry, you quit, because he quit. You're done. He said, no, go sit over there. We'll talk to you in a minute. And I was like, oh, maybe. I didn't know what was going on. Next guy goes in, he gets thumped. And so we take about a 30-minute break, and then they put me up. Because when I was doing the tryouts, man, I was just going right through it. I didn't gas it. I had great conditioning. And so I get in the ring with this guy. And so he goes after me. And for the first 5 minutes, he's getting the best of me, but I'm still keeping up. Uh-huh. And then probably about 7 minutes in, he starts to gas. And then I turn it on. And I just thump this guy. And so then he gets over and he puts me aside and has me go sit with the rest of the other two guys that just went. And then the other guys kind of did. And then after that, he got up and he circled us into a group. And he said, okay, well, congratulations. You all made it. And I was shocked. I was like, how is that possible? Like, I thought you guys quit. You didn't make it, because I was the only one that actually made it. And so he said everybody made it, and then they went through the classes. And well, the difference was that we actually did shows, whereas at Buzz's, we never did a show. We never went in a wrestling ring. It was constantly just doing amateur stuff and then making me shoot on guys and making them quit. Wow. So it was really the first experience I had as a pro wrestler and learning pro wrestling. And then I got an opportunity about 6 months in. I ended up getting the strap off of Nelson. He dropped it to me. Probably 6 months later, I went to Japan and went with Baba's group. Baba's group. First one, Old Japan. And then later on, Inoki. And so I had a really good opportunity early on, within a year and a half, to really expose myself into the wrestling business. Then, of course, UWF came around, and that was more of what we would call the hybrid pro wrestling.
Now that was kind of like a mix of real, right? With the UWF. I mean, it was a little bit more of a hardcore version of pro wrestling.
No, it wasn't real. No, it was basically sparring with the kicks, punches, knees, throws, and then submissions, and then rope escapes, knockdowns. Almost every single time when you hit a knockdown, it was planned, and you had to do the count. The thing with UWF was that it was a hybrid, where it was a lot more aggressive, but it was like controlled sparring. Okay. And you knew who was going to win in the end, and it was controlled. You were still hitting each other. You were making contact.
And so then it went from that after, I became, successful in that early on. Funaki Suzuki came to me and said, hey, we got an idea. And this is after Fujiwara Gumi decided that he was going to do his shows. And that didn't work out really well. So Funaki and Suzuki came to me and said, we want to do this for real. Like, we want to know what it looks like if pro wrestling was real, where the hybrid pro wrestling was real. And I said, hey, I'm in. I'm tired of putting guys over that, can't do a push-up. And so we went out and we started the group called Pancras. We did our first real event, and I fought Funaki in the main event, and I ended up beating him. And that's the first time I think anybody really saw me go live, like literally with no handcuffs. I could just go out there and go hard. And I caught Funaki with a kick to the midsection, which I believe right in the beginning hurt him. Wasn't trying to hurt him. It happened. And I think that it hindered him from really competing at a high level that whole fight.
We started talking about your professional wrestling career, but I wanted to ask you before we got into that, can you tell me a little bit about your amateur wrestling? I never really heard about your background in amateur wrestling.
Yeah, amateurs, again, when I talked a little bit about my upbringing, I didn't go to school. When I was in grade school, I was hit and miss. I was always locked up, or I was being transferred to another home. I didn't get to really play a whole lot of sports, or at least consistently, because I was always, moved around from a home to a home, or locked up in juvenile hall, or living on the street. So I ended up at 13. I ended up getting into high school my freshman year. I didn't know it at the time, but that's really where I was going to start my education, like as a freshman in high school. I ended up trying out for the freshman team. Didn't know a whole lot about wrestling. I did a little bit when I was in these different places. I joined just to join, but never really learned anything. Just went out and did it, and then I was gone. So here was an opportunity for me to really understand and learn. With not knowing it, I didn't think I was going to be staying at the Shamrock Boys Home either. I felt I was going to run away from there because the home was too nice, and I thought it was weird. Like there was some freaky stuff going to happen. And so I never really kind of felt that was where I was going to stay. I was looking at a lot of stuff I could steal. It was a gold mine in that sense. But I did. I ended up going into wrestling. I remember my freshman year, and remember the kind of kid I was. Like I had no understanding of finishing anything. I mean, I was at one place and I was gone. There was no consistency in me starting something and finishing something. And so I started my freshman year. I went in and wrestled. I won a few matches with just pure anger. Got a couple technicals from picking kids up and slamming them or even hitting them because a crossface to me turned into a punch. Mm-hmm. I ended up getting into some problems as a freshman. Ended up leaving the team, even though they could see some talent, but I was raw. My sophomore year, did the same thing, started, ended up quitting. My junior year, I came back. There was a new coach. I remember his name was Mike Paul. And for whatever reason, man, the guy connected with me because the other coaches, Dan, you know this, there's a lot of coaches that just, they got their way and that's that. And they're going to make you conform to it or you're out. And I was always the one being out because I wouldn't conform. And again, a lot of it was me. It wasn't the coach. It was just me not being able to deal with that kind of authority. And so Mike Paul comes in there, really kind of a quiet-spoken guy, pretty well built, wrestled himself. He was younger. I think he was like 25 or 26. Had done really well in one state. He had some credentials and wrestled with me and just tore me up. So I already had a respect for him in that nature. He talked softly and didn't demand things. He basically would put it on you, on what you wanted to do and how you wanted to do this. It's not like you're going to go out and wrestle without putting the work in, but it's on you. If you don't put the work in, then you're going to get what you get when you go out there. And so I remember it just kind of clicked. And I remember my junior year, I went all the way to the semis. I ended up losing in the finals. So I didn't go into to state. My senior year, I ended up going back, finished the junior year, had a great season. I think I lost maybe 3 or 4 matches. I don't remember the exact number, 3 or 4 matches. I did well, beat a lot of really credible wrestlers with my experience, didn't have a whole lot. My senior year, and football was doing well too. I mean, I had scholarships, some different schools to play ball, and wrestling, it's same thing. And I remember my senior year, I started out with that, had a whole another confidence because I went from this punk kid to now all of a sudden this kid that people wanted to be on the wrestle mat, wanted to be on the football field, would help me get the grades that I needed to get to stay out there because I had to have a C, not a D, but a C, not average, but a C in every class. Yeah. So I had to work hard to keep my grades up in order to stay. And that's the only reason why I did the work, was because I wanted to wrestle. I wanted to play football. And so I remember doing the work to do that. And I remember my senior year went in and I started out right away, a lot of pins. You don't go into league until the second half. So you're doing like we wrestled a lot in Reno because I was in Susanville, California. And so our league was Chico, Placerville, Oroville, all those areas up there. But preseason, we would do Nevada, all in Nevada. And so then we would have this big Rotary tournament that we would have somewhere mid-season before we started in onto our season, and it was a big tournament, one of the bigger tournaments in Northern California. And my junior year, I think I had went to the final, lost in the finals. But my senior year, I remember going in and wrestling a guy named McCann out of Douglas in Nevada in a tournament. I beat him in the finals. He was a 2-time Nevada state champion. I ended up, and he was a one. I was wrestling at 185 in Cali, but I only weighed 160, 167 pounds, 170 pounds, and I was wrestling up weight because I was just so damn strong, and I was out muscling all those guys, and I was faster and better shaped and quicker. So I was beating all these guys at the 185. But when I went into Nevada, there was no 185 pound weight class. So I was wrestling 190. And so when they wrestled in California, we did the 185 pound weight class. And that's where I beat Lomery from Urington, who was a 3-time, this was his senior year and my senior year. He was a 3-time Nevada state champion and hadn't lost a match his whole high school career. I beat him in overtime. And I was.
Were you still 167 at that time?
I had 170, and I wrestled him at 185 in Cali at our tournament, and I beat him in overtime. And he outweighed me by a lot. And then I went into Douglas, and I wrestled, or I went to wrestled McCann at Douglas High School at their tournament in Nevada, and I ended up beating him, and he was a 2-time champion. So all of the beginning of my high school senior year wrestling, I was beating guys that were, up there qualified in these tournaments. I didn't lose a match. We get into the actual, I think it was probably halfway through season. I wrestled a couple guys from my league, was Chico and Placerville and Oroville, and I was sticking everybody. And there was one guy in my class that I was going to have to face that had also done the same thing. And I can't remember his name, but I think he was from Paradise. And we were getting ready to do a dual match. And I think it was probably the second or the last tournament before we go to sections, and then sections to state. And I was pretty well recognized. I didn't have a whole lot of history because I had 2 years of wrestling, but my name was definitely out there in just that 1 year, my senior year, where I was beating all these qualified wrestlers in these tournaments. And so we go into practice, and the whole world. I mean, I went from this punk kid and nothing. Now all of a sudden, man, I got everything just right at my feet. Like I'm literally living on top of the world. And everything I ever did was because of sports. I got everything. Awesome. And so I remember my senior year and having all that success. And I go into practice and I start wrestling and just bad shot, And again, I can't even, like I said, it's not the memory part because I don't remember a lot that happened because it was such a bad injury. As I remember, the last thing I remember is shooting in and scooping a guy up and picking him up and just twirling him like a helicopter. And the guy was probably 190 pounds, 200 pounds. He was a heavyweight. I was probably 170. And I'm wrestling heavier guys because that's what I was doing. And I went to go take him down, and that's the last thing I remember. So what was explained to me was like when I went to go down, because the coach was screaming at me, you better take him down, you're going to run walls, which was a conditioning drill. And so I went to go do that, and I ended up falling, like just slipping, like just overstepping and then falling on my ass with the guy on top of me. And as I did that, it pushed my chin down to my sternum, stretched my neck, and then came down and just smashed the cartilage and broke the bone. And I remember as I rolled over to there, and I don't remember this, is what people would say. I had actually rolled over to my stomach, and I wasn't moving. And then after that point, I remember the coach saying, "Get up." And I don't know how long I was out, but I remember him saying, "Get up." And I'm trying to get up. It meant like, okay, and I'm still confused, right? And all of a sudden I realized I ain't moving. Like I'm not moving. And probably I would say 30 to 45 minutes into this thing, an ambulance comes on, put me in this Star Wars board where they clamp me together, put me down, take me to the hospital, which is Redding, California. It's like 2-hour drive from Susanville.
Oh. Yeah.
I get to the hospital and they do these x-rays, and now I'm clamped to this. I mean, again, I think understanding the injury is like you're not sitting up in a bed. You're literally laying flat in a bed. They've got you strapped down. And if you have to go to the bathroom, you're going through a hole on the bottom, or they flip you over and you go through the hole on top. Whatever it is, because you're not sitting up, you're not bending your head, not doing anything. They got you strapped and locked. You're not moving. And they had this mirror that was over the bed to where I could actually see the TV, or I could see the x-rays to where they were showing it. And I'm looking through this mirror because I am not sitting up or moving or anything. So I remember, and I had this excruciating pain going through my arms, like tremendous amount of pain. And they gave me, obviously gave me some meds for that, and it went away. But I remember laying there, and as the doctor goes in, he puts this x-ray up there, and I look at the neck, and normally you see a neck, it's got kind of a little bit of curve to it, and it goes down, but you're not a doctor, so you can't really see really what's going on. But when you're looking at my neck, it wasn't straight. It was literally, you could see the notch that had gone with the bone. It was a notch in there. And then I looking at myself and I said, I don't know a whole lot, right? But I'm looking and I'm going, yeah, there's something not right with that, right? But I don't understand the ramifications of that. And so I remember him telling my dad, like, hey, we're going to have to do surgery. We're going to have to, he broke his neck. Kind of they use different terminology, but basically broke a neck, which is how my dad explained to me. He said, well, you broke your neck. I was like, okay, cool. How long? Like my first question, and Dan, you know this because you nothing stops you. Like you're okay, I get it. How long? Where do we go from here? How do we get back onto the mat? How do we get back on the football field? What is my next thing here? Because this isn't over. Like in my head, I'm not thinking of that. I'm just saying, okay, it's injury. How long? And the next thing that came to me just shattered me. Because I remember him saying to me, well, your contact sports, is something that's not going to be in your future. And I was like, wow. What do you mean? Like, you can't, with this injury, you're not going to be able to be, come back. And I remember I was looking forward to college now, not high school, and in wrestling. And I was told that was not going to happen. Only reason why I'm going to college is because of sports. I'm wanted for sports, not for my education, not for anything other than sports. The only reason why I got good grades was because I wanted to play sports. It had nothing to do with school, zero to do with school. It had to do with sports. And you're telling me that I can't do that anymore? And I remember, and I'm 17 years old. I mean, I did everything right. I mean, I didn't do anything wrong. Why is this happening? I didn't. And again, I'm a 17-year-old kid and don't understand how this can happen. I don't have anything else. I mean, he's not my father right now. I don't have a home. I mean, where do I go from here? Because that was my out. And now you're telling me I don't have that? And I got depressed. I mean, I was like, I really thought like I'm nobody. Like I have zero interest to anyone. Nobody wants me. Like I'm going right back to the streets because I got nothing else. This is it. And I just had no drive, and I was just getting really down. And I remember he said to me, and I took this from the moment he said it to me, and he's probably said this to me before in a different way, but for whatever reason in this moment it meant everything. And I remember him saying to me, do you truly believe that you have come this far for it just to be over now? Do you believe? And I found Christ during that time, which was another big reason why I was able to be the person I was. But he truly said, do you believe God leads you this far and got you so far for him to walk away from you right now, for you to walk away from yourself right now? Do you believe that that's really how this is going to end? And he said to me, he goes, and this is the one that really hit me. He says, you are the only person that has the ability to change what your future is going to be. You have that ability to do that. Nobody, I can't do it. Him saying himself, coaches can't do it. Nobody can do this but you.
This was Bob that was saying all this?
Yes. This is my dad, but well, it wasn't at the time, but Bob Shamrock, who's laying it on me saying, bro, you're the only one. Like, you're in this situation. You are the only one that could take yourself out of this situation. What is it that you're going to do from this point on? What is it what you're going to do to get you out of here because nobody else is going to do this for you. And that was hard. That's a hard message, but it was real. And I remember at that point in time, I said, he's right. You know what, man? He is right. Because nobody, and I'm a doctor, nobody can tell me what I can or cannot do. I'm the only one that knows what I'm willing to do to get to where it is I want to go. And I did. I took it right from that point in time. I even started training with this halo on and chest plates on, ripped the bolts out of my head, not smart. But I had the drive that, listen, it is up to me. And nobody can tell me what I'm capable of doing. And at that, and that was a moment in my life where I realized that I'm in control. Nobody else is.
Yeah, I know, Ken, what you're talking about right now is very, very, very powerful because there's a lot of people in today's world that they think they have to have all these other types of outlets or this other kind of help. I mean, the reality is it's up to you. It's up to, because I talk about setting goals and trying to achieve things. And again, it's a lot of times I tell people it's just like pull out a piece of paper and then grabbing that pencil, the ink pen, and just writing out your goals. But then you have to write all these little baby steps. Yeah, because writing a goal is one aspect, but all these little things you have to do in order to achieve this. You receive this devastating injury. You don't want to accept this because you don't want the future of wearing a halo and being a paraplegic, a quadriplegic. I mean, you don't want that lifestyle. So yeah, no, that's people understand where that the mind and the spirit are two things that incredible power, but also there's I'm a big believer in the power of prayer as well.
Yeah, I think that, especially and we all see this a lot in the world, whereas it seems like there's more excuses, or there's more excuses than there is answers. And that's because no one wants to find the answer. They all want to be able to use an excuse to be able to get them to an easier path. And it never ends that way. It's never easier. It's always harder. So, but if you find the answer, if you literally find the answer to whatever your problem is, it's an easier path. It may be harder finding that answer and the truth of that answer, but once you do, your path is now drawn out for you. But when you make excuses and don't want to find that answer, your life is never going to go where you want it to go.
Right.
This is crazy because, the little kid in me being on the screen with both of you, who I looked up to so much growing up, it's kind of like a dream come true. And we haven't even started talking about your UFC career and stuff like this. But hearing this stuff about you, Ken, just makes me much more of a fan of you for what you went through, even more than your career. But the real star in this, I was thinking about Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson had Cus D'Amato. I'm just so intrigued by Bob Shamrock. And I think I would love to hear so much more about him. If I could, I know I'm getting way ahead of myself. What's going on with the Shamrock House now? Is it still operating? Did you end up becoming a part of it and kind of taking place of your dad? I'm curious to hear about it.
Yeah, he ended up selling it because when I moved to Mooresville, North Carolina to start my professional wrestling career, he sold the boys' home because Frank at that time, which was the other kid that we really had an interest in and was working with, ended up going to prison because he robbed a store and got caught selling some stuff. And he ended up, going to prison at 17 years old. So a lot of stuff had happened. I remember my dad ended up selling the home because the state came in and wanted to put locks on the doors and put locks on the food cabinets and locks on everything. And the way that he ran the house was like a house, a home. Right. And that everybody had access to food whenever they wanted it and had access to be able to watch TV and whatever. There was no locks. And they wanted to come in and institutionalize it. And he didn't want any part of that. So he sold it. And then he moved to Mooresville, North Carolina with me because it was around the same time that I was getting into my pro wrestling career. And he ended up working in a group home down there. And then after I started getting some notoriety in the Japanese organization, we ended up moving to Lodi and we opened a boys' home. I was a part of the home and in the financing part, I actually opened it and my father ran it. And then I was a part of helping with those kids. And we had 8 of them at the time. And so my understanding, after he sold it, it stayed a boys' home for probably about a year or two. It ended up then becoming, and it is to this day, a women's shelter for battered women and children. So
Okay.
because of the way the house is set up, there's multiple rooms, there's bunk houses, there's a lot of beds, right? So it had to be used for something that was going to be working with people, and it did. So it went from that boys' home to a women's shelter. It is a women's shelter now.
Okay. What was your relationship like with Frank growing up? Were the two of you close, competitive? I'm just curious.
Well, and again, I'm not saying this to put him down, but Frank was young, and there was no competitiveness between
Okay.
me. Obviously, he was just younger, right?
Right.
I wasn't around. I was in college at the time when he came in. He's 10 years younger than me, 12 years younger than me, one of the two. I don't remember, but I was playing football, and I was at Shasta College after breaking my neck. And obviously, I'd take a year or 2 years off to get back to where I needed to be, which was against everything doctors told me, and even my dad. They were worried about me going back, but that was me. I was either going to do or not do, and I did. But I remember him talking about Frank when I was at college, and he would go to my games and end up, like I said, when I played, I led the team in tackles, was a defensive captain. I was good. And even after breaking my neck, never thought about it. Like it never even entered my mind that anything would go wrong. I just did it. And I remember going back and seeing Frank for the first time because my dad had talked about him. So you got to meet him. He's like you, man. He's tough. He's got all this. And he was 14 when he came. I was 13. So he's 14. I think when I met him, he was 15. And I came over, and I remember I was home for a vacation, and we had gotten done eating dinner, and we had this big house, and we had this table that was seated 18 seatings, and then we had another table on the side that seated the rest. I think there was 10 on the side. And so I remember we always kind of all after dinner was over, you'd have a dish crew doing the dishes, and then a lot of us would go in and watch TV. It was a big living room. Some of us would wrestle, around, because we had this big open area. We'd box, whatever. It was whatever you wanted to do. And we would just have fun. And I remember when I got there, I just met Frank. He was sitting at the table, and I remember, he seemed to be like a good kid, really well put together. And I remember after it was over, we all went in the living room, and my dad always challenging me. And I did the same with Frank too, as he got a little bit older. And I remember I was sitting on the couch. We had this big wraparound couch, and all these kids were in there, and they were horsing around and wrestling, and we had, something on TV, and we're just chilling. And my dad walks in and he goes, "Hey," says, "I'll give anybody $20, and I'll take whoever participates. I will take all of them to Reno and give them $20 because we go on the strip to Circus when we were young, and he'd take us down there. We'd all go out there on the weekend and have fun." And he said, "Whoever can take Ken down and hold him there for 5 seconds, I will take all of you to Reno."
Wow.
I looked at him and said, I'm like, "What are you doing?" It was like, of course, I knew because he was always doing stuff like that. So I stood up in the middle of the floor and I said, "Okay, I'm just going to let you guys know because I don't know these kids. I knew some of them, but not all of them. There were a lot of new kids there." And I looked, and Frank was one of them. And I remember looking right at him and said, "I'm going to tell you something." I said, "I ain't playing because there's multiple." And there was about, at this time, there's probably 12 or 13 guys in the living room at the time. And probably by the time I finished talking and telling him that I ain't going easy on any of you because there's a lot of you, and the first one that comes in is going down hard. And obviously, I'm not going to punch him. We're not punching anybody. And so I remember when I stood up, I said, "Okay, come on." Because it was kind of in fun, right? I said, "Okay, come on." And there was only 4 guys that out of all of them, only 4. And Frank was the first one to step up. He literally jumped up and said, "I'll do it." And I was like, "You're going down first." And then another 2 or 3 guys stepped up behind him. And I said, "All right, let's go." And my dad's got this smile on his face from face to face. Says, "Okay, let's see." So Frank is the only one that ever lunged in at me. And I grabbed him because he had this long hair. So when he came in, I grabbed his hair, I shoved his head down onto the ground, and I held him there, and I said, "The next one is going to get just body slam. I'll smash you." There's 4 of them. I'm trying to scare him. And so I'm holding Frank down. He's going, "Come on, man, you guys, come on." And none of them stepped up. They all sat down. I let go of Frank, and I said, "Good crew you got here, buddy." That was my first experience when I first met Frank at the home.
What was your martial arts training leading up? Because we haven't touched on the UFC yet, but I hear about your pro wrestling and your amateur wrestling background. I was curious, like, what martial arts you were in.
You know, I dabbled when I was playing football. I was at this Hawaiian Kempo class. A guy named Mike Chance. I was learning a little bit of that. I did a tournament one time when I got disqualified for excessive contact. And it was a black belt that they put me in because I was aggressive. Didn't know a whole lot. So I never really got into it because it just felt like, man, if you can't really do it, why? What's the point? Like,
right.
You know, it just didn't make sense to me. Not where I came from. That just didn't make sense. But I studied a little bit just because they were teaching it, and I kind of just dabbled in it. But when it came down to just going, it just didn't have any place to where I felt things worked. Because wrestling, I mean, that works. Like, you take somebody to the ground, you get on top of them, game over. Like, that's
again, what you got to enjoy about the sport of wrestling. You can be the coach's son. It doesn't matter. You have a challenge match for the weight class. If you win the challenge match, you're in the way. You're stepping forward for a competition. That's why I just like you there, Ken. I love football. I love football more than I did wrestling. It's like crash, bang, boom every 30 seconds. Loved it. Never left the field. I was on, you name it, offense, defense, punt return teams, kickoff team. It didn't matter. I just like I love that just for the crash, bang, boom aspect of it right there. But I was on a team by literally by my junior year on a team that should have won states, but because someone would either miss a block, miss a tackle, now the whole team loses. I chose the sport of wrestling because the definition of wrestling, it's a team sport based upon individual performances. Right. The team can lose, and yet I can still go on and do my thing. So I chose the sport of wrestling just because of that. But even still to this day, I still love watching football. Just because every 30 seconds, crash, bang, boom, you know?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of football. I follow it. I play fantasy leagues, you know, so I'm in dynasty stuff.
But you also know that a lot of these college coaches, when they find out that you're a wrestler, not only are you a good football player, but if you've got a wrestling background, they want you that much more because you're just that much more of an athlete, you know?
Well, you also know how to leverage. You know how to do the leverage on hitting people because wrestling teaches you leverage.
Again, I guess, how did you hear about the UFC? How did you hear about it, and how did you get involved in it originally? You know.
Yeah, make sure I could knock the cobwebs off my brain.
Well, I hear you. I'm getting the coffee in.
Yeah. I actually heard about it through one of my fighters because I was already over in Japan. And I was competing over there in a group called Pancras. And so when I first heard about it, one of my students, his name was Scott Bizak, had brought me a flyer. And they were talking about no rules, anything goes, you know, they're going to put this fight on. And of course, in my head, because I was a pro wrestler first, no holds barred meant chairs and bats and trash cans and, you know,
tables, ladders, and chairs. Oh my, yeah, that's it.
And so I just thought, no, that's pro wrestling. And he goes, no. I mean, it's not. And I was like, what are you talking about? I said, no, this is like the real thing. It's this family out there, and they do all this stuff, and they take on anybody. And I was like, there's no way they're going to do that. And so I remember putting in a call because Scott just kept hounding me. He said, no, man, this is real. And in my head, I'm like, this can't be real. It's just, I mean, you're talking, this was in, you know, when I first heard about it, it was 92, maybe the beginning of 92. Yeah. Because that's when 93 was when we did the first one. So I thought to myself, well, let me give it a call just to see, but you know, they don't do this stuff. Like there's sanctions, there's rules that you have to abide by, right? There's governing bodies. And so I thought what I was doing in Japan, because they couldn't do it here. I couldn't train here. I would go to a gym and go, hey, I want you to punch at me and I'm going to shoot on you. And they're like, no, you're not. We don't do that here. It's straight up stand up. And I was like, well, I just want to do it. No. I tried to do the same thing with wrestlers. Say, hey, shoot on me. I'm going to punch at you. And they're like, hey, I'm getting hit. It's like, I couldn't find anywhere to train or to go to Japan and fight because at that time, I hadn't literally moved over there yet. And so I thought, I literally, that's when I actually put the gym together because I felt like, okay, I can't get the work I need. So when Scott brings me this, I'm already educated to a certain part of what they're asking of this event, which is basically no rules. But in my head, I saw it was groundwork and it was, striking. And I was like, that's what we were doing in Japan. But it was one step further than that. Like you could kick a dude on the ground. If he was on the ground, you kick him right in the face. You could knee him. I mean, you could bite him. You get penalty, which I didn't know till we got there. But it was literally that. So I picked up the phone because I felt like, no, there's a catch to it. So I remember picking up the phone, talking to Art Davies, and told him what my credentials were. At the time, I was a champion over in Japan in this mixed martial arts fighting, which is similar to what you guys are doing. But, it says here there's no rules. Explain that. He literally just laid it out like, yeah, it's whatever you want to do. And I'm like, shut up, shut the door, get out of here. He's like, no, real. So I was like, so he told me, because he didn't accept me right away. He said, well, because he obviously didn't know me. I could be blowing smoke up his ass and he wouldn't know the difference, right? I could tell him I was a world champion in knife fighting and he wouldn't know the difference. So he had to actually check on it. Well, I don't remember how long it was. It wasn't very long, a few hours, half hour. I couldn't tell you the exact time, but it was pretty fast back, a call I got back, and he said, yeah, we'd love to have you. And all the way up to the fight, I remember going over to Japan and competing and defending my title. I think it had to be 3 or 4 days before actually it was probably a week because I flew out and got there 3 days before the actual event started. And so the whole time, I even brought Funaki with me. The kid I knocked out for my title defense, and then the doctor in Japan, and of course my father, and they all accompanied me to Japan or to Denver, Colorado. So I remember getting there. Obviously, didn't take into account the mile high. So getting there, so that came into play. It's like, okay, I didn't. Well, first of all, I didn't think it was going to happen. I just couldn't see how this could be legal.
You're waiting for Bob Barker to pull the curtain back and go, oh, Ken, here we go.
yeah. So it was definitely something I just didn't expect to happen because I couldn't even get what I was doing in Japan legal here. Like they just wouldn't allow that to happen. So this was like the whole other level. I said, nah. But so we get there and, we're there for a day or two and start, kind of checking. It's nothing, right? It's just, there's nobody there. So they do this press conference and we in mind, I'm like, there's something's going to happen. I know they're going to pull us aside. So we get a press conference. They start punching bags. They do all this stuff. And I see these guys walking around. And you got Kevin Rozier, God bless his soul, Zane Frazier, and a lot of these guys that I have no idea who they are. None, because I have no education in boxing or kickboxing or any of that stuff. I just never watched it, right? So I remember they had this talk about direction and everything, but when I looked at them, I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, these guys can't be fighting. They're going to die in the first round. Like, I'm thinking in my head, they can't do it because they looked way out of shape. And then I saw a few other guys that were running like Gerard Godot, who I knew from Japan was legit. That dude was a legit badass, right? So I knew him. And I remember looking around and I didn't know anybody else. I saw Horace Gracie and he's walking around in his gi. And I remember thinking, anytime I ever saw anybody do that, I was like, man, these guys are wearing his reputation on his jacket. Like, why do you walk around in your gi, man? It's like, you're not training. And I remember thinking to him, I said, that poor kid's going to get hurt. Like, he doesn't belong here. And so, and again, like with the couple of the other guys, I was like, dude, these guys are like horrible. And then I saw some of them that were like Art Jimerson and and Gerard Godot, and some guys that you knew were legit. And so in my head, I'm like, I'm going to just destroy people, because I knew what I knew. And I knew how it worked against other stand-up fighters, because I fought Frank Laudman over in Japan. He was a former Muay Thai champion. Mm-hmm. And I destroyed him. And I'd only been doing it for 6 months. And so I knew how it matched up. And I was like licking my chops, like, oh. But then they called a rules meeting. Quote, unquote, no rules. Then I said, okay, here it comes. Here it comes. They're going to pull us aside. Okay, this is how it's going to work. So we go into this room, fighters only. The little press that we had, I don't know if they were allowed or not, but I remember it was pretty small. It was just us. And so they started talking about things you can and cannot do. One of them is you couldn't bite. Okay, I'm okay with that, right? Well, whatever. But it's supposed to be no rules, whatever. And then they say you can't wear tape on your hands, which I'm like, what? Like, I mean, remember, this is 93 where that was unheard of, not taping your hands. Like, right. You just heard of. And then not being able to wear gloves if you wanted to. Well, then, or Jefferson ended up wearing one glove. No wrestling shoes. I'm like, what? Like, I'd never, ever been on a mat without wrestling. Dan, there's a whole different thing. And I'd never done that. But because I was young and cocky, I felt like, no, I didn't say a word. I was like, whatever, I'm going to kill these guys anyways. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. And so I remember, it was a sumo a guy that kind of stood up and said, I don't know about any of you guys here, but I came here to fight. And I remember thinking in my head, like, you are a dumb person for doing this. Because what it did is it took away leverage from Zane Frazier, took away leverage from Gerard Godot. They took away from Art Jemerson, guys who lived and breathed taping their hands to protect their hands, right? Because they were strikers. So when he did that, he took away all their leverage to fight back, because he made them look like they were whips. Me, I didn't. I literally was, and I was dumb for myself for not going, this is no rules, no holds barred. I'm wearing my shoes. I didn't do that because I was young, dumb, and felt like nothing could stop me from doing what I wanted to do. And so that was really my first experience and understanding that, oh, shoot, okay, this is really happening, other than the actual rules they put in to kind of hinder some of the other guys, like the strikers and the guys that had, like myself. They literally focused on me taking my shoes away, because they knew that, especially the research they did on me, that's what I did. I mean, I wrestled in high school. I did well there. I did some freestyle matches. And then, obviously from there it was, football, and then into the fighting world. So I've been doing it my whole life with wrestling shoes on.
Yeah, so people just did not realize all the gripping power that those wrestling shoes would have on a mat, especially a vinyl surface. A little bit of water gets on that vinyl surface, becomes a very slippery slope. Even the wrestling shoe should be designed even more and more. When you think about wrestling and any kind of grappling, they only put a little bit edge on the inside. I'm thinking there should be a lot more edge, because the guys actually shoot off of the side of the foot a whole lot more than what any of these shoe manufacturers ever do. So I don't know why. I've shown that to, like, Cliff Keen. They're a manufacturer out of Ann Arbor. I showed it to the owners of that, and I go, you guys need to have more of this so that shots could be even that much more faster yet, But no, right. I get. Did they have, Ken, at that time, did they actually hold that press conference? And that's the first time you got a chance to meet the other fighters? I mean, where it's like, I know that my first experience was, I just knew I'm going to the same, but I really did not know anybody else until the night before. You have this press conference, because there's no way in, there's no weight class. So it's just a press conference where you they'll have a mediator at the podium. Fighter number one stand on up, and they'll say, this is Ken Shamrock. He stands this tall. He weighs this much, and this is what his fighting background is. And then sit down. Fighter number two, and then they pulled out a bingo ball machine with 8 balls and eight names on them. They spun around. Ken Shamrock number 2, spin around again. Royce Gracie, number 1. Royce Gracie number 2, and you learn for your first time ever first you met your 7 other opponents for first time ever because the internet was not flourishing the way it is today. And then you find out your first match, your first opponent, less than 24 hours, and there's nothing to Google. I can't find out what does Ken Shamrock do? What's his background stuff like that? You can't. There's nothing to Google. So it was
the same way with us. The difference was that when we got there, they had moved, and again, I was the target. There was no question on how things went in that because I was the only one that knew how to grapple. And at no level at Hoist, not even close. Hoist was just way above everybody when it came to that grappling style. And so I remember when I went in there, they were targeting me, and they moved, I kid you not, they moved me around 3 to 4 times because I saw I was going to go once, I was going to go against Zane, and then they moved that, and then they moved it to Hoist, and then they moved, I think the 4th time they finally moved it to Patrick Smith. And that was the day of the fight where I found out that that's who I was actually going to fight because they moved it around so many times, like we didn't know who we were fighting. And it really didn't matter. I mean, that wasn't no issue because that's the way it was been, it's been that way for many years after that. And we didn't care. We just went in and did our jobs, and that was that. The only thing I think that in that whole thing that bothered me the most was that they changed that no rules thing. And then they specifically targeted certain individuals and took things away from them that would hinder their style.
Yeah. Well, I know, like you're talking about the shoes. When my opportunity came up in UFC number 4, I said, well, I'd like to wear shoes. And like, well, if you do wear shoes, you will not be allowed to kick or stomp. And I'm thinking, well, what did I lose there? Nothing. So it's like I go, I can live with those the bands. But I did learn though later in life. I did start doing a little bit of stomping, and a good stomp really does hurt. If you get up against the cage wall. So and then know how to shoulder pop up, a jaw jack people, things of that nature, punch them in the esophagus with the shoulder. So stuff that you would never think about unless you started actually grappling people and go, okay, I'm wondering if I'm in this position, what can I do with the shoulder?
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of tell this story because I think this goes a long ways for humbling. I got truly humbled. I mean, literally humbled in that UFC 1 because when I came in, I told you I didn't see any competition other than Gerard Godot. Patrick Smith, I kind of read up on him once I found out I was fighting him, and I had about 20 minutes to kind of go through, and he did have some background on his whatever he was doing in there in Denver and all this, and I figured he was a legitimate a karate guy, so I felt like that he was going to be a pretty tough opponent just because I knew he could strike, right? And being bare knuckle, it only takes one shot with a cut or a punch landed, you're out. So I took him pretty serious. But when I got him against Hoist, even though I saw what he did to Art Jimerson, it was a joke because Art Jimmer was confused because he went in with one bare knuckle and one boxing glove. It was like taking a knife to a gunfight. You're like, dude, it's bare knuckle. Why are you putting a pillow on your hand? It's not helping you. And so when I watched him do that, I was like, I'm going to destroy this guy. I went in, I took Patrick Smith out. I figured Patrick Smith and Gerard Godot were probably 2 legit guys. And since Gerard was on the other side, I would meet him in the finals and never even blinked at Hoist. And so when I go in against him, I shoot in on him, and I remember spinning him over. And all of a sudden, I remember there's this thing around my neck. And immediately, you know how you all of you realize going, oops.
Uh-oh, yeah.
Like, I just walked into this bear trap. Like, this young kid that's a nobody. And in my head, I know I'm losing. Like, I can't get this off. And that changed my perspective moving forward on not getting comfortable with anyone. And it really did, because I was pretty cocky and confident when I was over in Japan, because no one in the United States, I did tryouts for years, and I fighted anybody, and I would bring them in, and I would just run through them because of what I knew. And when people talk about Hoist, they talk about, well, yeah, but you guys are 30 pounds heavier than him, and I keep trying to, because we do the same thing, right? I fight guys 30 pounds bigger than me, and I destroy them. It doesn't matter how big you are; it matters how skilled you are.
Yeah.
And if the skills are the same, then the size matters, right? But as far as if the skill levels is much higher than someone who is bigger than you, you're still going to beat them. It's just a matter of time. And so I don't like it when you play both sides of the coin, where you say we fight anybody, anywhere, anytime, any size, and we can beat anybody. But then when you get tested, then you bring in the size. Go, oh yeah, well they were this much bigger than me. It was like, well, you can't have it both ways, right? You're bragging on how good you are, and you can beat anybody, no matter how big they are. And then when someone challenges you, you say, oh, yeah, but he's 10 pounds or 15 pounds bigger than me. It's like you can't have it like that. And I don't care who it is. The guys, and I fought guys that were, 100 pounds or 150 heavier than me. It didn't matter because I was much more skilled than them. And it just doesn't matter. And so this narrative that you seem to keep getting back and forth on, guys that are a little bit smaller and guys that are bigger, and how big it was to beat them, when you're looking at them going, well, 3.5 years, actually 2.5 years of experience to 20 years of experience goes a long way to be able to handle guys bigger than you.
Yeah.
Especially with the gi.
Well, let me ask, Ken, like going into that fight with Hoist, had any of you guys really heard or knew much Brazilian jiu-jitsu, was that just something that kind of caught everybody off guard?
I didn't hear anything about it until actually I wanted to fight. Then we started hearing this noise about this Gracie family and how in LA they did all these tryouts. And so we started watching some of the tryouts. And even when I watched the tryouts, I wasn't impressed. I just looked at it and go, yeah, but that don't make sense to me. Like, I get it, but if you get a skilled guy, that I'm not sure how that works. And obviously, I found out much different when I actually fought him. It was a world of difference. But you don't, because of the way that style is, it's so passive aggressive that when you watch it, you're not in fear of it. And even when I fought Hoist, I was never in fear. Like fighting Dan, I'm fearful. Fighting Coleman, I'm fearful. Fighting Don Fry, I'm fearful. They can hurt me. Hoist couldn't hurt me. Like, I wasn't afraid of Hoist hurting me. Yeah, he may put me in a submission, he may choke me, but I was never like in fear of that. There's just certain guys, that you fight that you realize this dude could put me in a hospital.
Yeah. No, again, I totally get where you're coming from there on that. It was, well, what'd you think the fact that eldest sibling of the Gracie clan, Horian Gracie, being the matchmaker? That was one of the, where again, I don't know if we addressed this in our first little chatting about this, but I always say that the farm boy analogy that comes to my mind is never let the fox inside the hen house. It's kind of like who's lining up who with who, and who could have an easier route to the finals, who could have a tougher route to the finals. Because when it comes to matchmaking, anyone can win if you match them up with the right people, and especially in the right progression of people and stuff. There's ways to make life miserable for people, and there's ways of making life, skate right to the finals. And can't help you in the finals, but we'll get you to the finals,
Right. I look at it like this. If I was in their situation, in their position, I'd have done the same thing. Like, I'm going to build my program. I'm going to build my brand, and I'm going to invite people in. Obviously we got to invite people. We can go half guys that are just, tomato cans, but we got to bring in some legitimate guys, and no one's going to take us serious. So by bringing me in, bringing Gerard Godot in, being Patrick Smith in, they brought certain guys in they realized that would give them credibility by winning. They brought Art Jimerson in because he's a boxing world champion. Yeah. No one understands the difference in this, right? By them destroying him, they're like, wow, he just beat a world champion in boxing. Yeah. Whereas you and I, Dan, know that we could destroy any boxer because they have absolutely no chance to put you in the face when you're shooting on them, and they can't stop.
Grappling. Well, again, for your UFC one, did they? Because I know that by the time I was there, they just had you categorized. You're either from a striking category or from a grappling category. Did they do that right from the very get go from UFC one?
No, they didn't understand that yet. It was basically this American shoot fighter, which is what they called me. And then Hoist Gracie was the jiu-jitsu something or another. And then Art Jemerson was the boxer. So they really hadn't categorized the striking and the grappling yet.
Yeah.
And no one really knew, at least I didn't. I wasn't really educated on the world of boxing. I mean, obviously I knew the top guys, Duran, Hagler, Leonard, Holmes, Ali, Holyfield. I mean, there was certain guys that I knew, but anything under that with kickboxing or anything like that, I didn't know.
Yeah.
So going there, I didn't really know anybody other than, Gerard Godot, because he was in Japan with me. So I knew who he was, and I knew he was legit. And so going into it, it didn't seem like there was any cause for me to be worried about anything, and not knowing really, even though even I had a little tiny understanding who the Gracies were because of some of the gym challenges and the other things they did. But I just didn't feel like with my strength and my wrestling background, my boxing background, and I had it before anyone. I was well-rounded before anyone.
Yep.
And I knew how to box. I won 4 tough mans before I ever started fighting. So I had the understanding of striking and how to brawl. And I had the high level, or at least for a standard in the United States. I was probably one of the better grapplers. And then Hoist came around. And then we understood we weren't even close to high level with what they were bringing to the table. And, so that was really, I think, in their defense, which I hate doing that, but I think it was genius on how they were able to put this together, how they were able to put this fight and put fighters in there and still challenge themselves to a point, because I was no joke. When it came to fighting, and they knew that I could get them. And obviously, as we saw how the thing went, I did almost. Like I said, if they would have been judges, there'd be no question, but there were no judges. But I think that they were really, Jorge was really smart in how he was able to brand this jiu-jitsu, because once they did this event and it was successful, they went on and did another one and another one, and all he was doing was building the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu brand. And it went nationally, man. That thing blew up.
Yeah.
And I mean,
each time that Hoist would win, he would simply say, Horn would go on to say, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu beats boxing, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu beats Taekwondo, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So literally, it was a great franchising machine and marketing for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, to where did Art Davey receive any recognition off of this? I mean, he was the businessman, the brainchild behind this whole concept, and yet he didn't get none of the action on any of that stuff. So,
it was fun. It was obviously in it. You're focused on what you're doing, but looking back on it now, you're just like, wow, what a clever. That was clever. I mean, clever.
Again, I always tell people, I tip my hat off to it. It was a genius idea for business wise, and it worked.
Yeah.
I just remember, as a kid watching this with you guys, it was such a culture shock, because I grew up watching the Jean-Claude Van Dammes and the Steven Seagals and stuff. And in the movies, it was always the bigger guy that won. And then that first match comes out with Gerard Godot and Taylor Tooley, and he kicks his tooth out. He beats it. I had no idea that it would be the smaller guy that was going to win. You said you obviously already knew who Gerard Godot was. Did you know that was kind of how that first match would go?
No doubt in my mind. I thought he would knock him out. I didn't know that was kind of just fell in his lap, because he hit him with a cross in a hook, and he dropped him. And that they said, because I remember him asking, so we can just kick him in the face from there on the ground. And I said, yeah. And it literally, when he dropped him, because I think Gerard set it up knowing that he was, because the guy was slow, right? There's just no way he's going to stop Gerard from landing what he wanted to land.
Right.
And so when he landed that punch and he went down, Gerard knew exactly where he was going with his kick. He was going to kick him right in the face, and he did. And that set the tone. If it had been me and Hoist or me and Patrick Smith, that was the first one that let out on this event, people would have walked out of the event because then they would have been screaming it was fake because no one understood what the hell we were doing.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and that's, just looking back at it, the way people thought fighting were versus now, everybody is kind of experienced in it. I mean, was it often that you saw a lot of those fighters back then that kind of had that image of this badass that would get in the ring and didn't really know what they were doing?
I think it was, as far as the beginning of it, I think most people looked at us like we were thugs, like we were guys that came out of prison or just street brawlers. They didn't understand the actual level of what it took to get in there and compete. And then as time went on, they actually did a special on me where I got the actual nickname, the world's most dangerous man. I believe CBS or ABC did a special, and they came out to my house and they shot me having dinner and shot me rolling around with my kids, and they shot me in this human aspect. And it gave, I think, and then it wasn't just that. There was other things that they followed up on. I was the start of it, because I was the first one to go out there and do charity work for the UFC, not for them, but in my behalf. I was in Puerto Rico because I was going to all group homes and at-risk kids, because that's where I came from. And I would go to these different places and I would visit with them and I talked to them. I'd give them tickets to the event. And that was right from the get-go, the beginning, the first one, because my father was the one that was lining that up. Well, then when UFC heard about I was doing it in Puerto Rico, they came in and asked if they could film it. And I wasn't filming it. I was just doing it to give back. And I wasn't using it for advertising or anything. I was just doing it. And they came in and said they wanted to film it. And I had to think about it for a minute because I was like, this is not what I'm doing it for, because I didn't know if that's really what we want people to see, working with some of these kids, because you don't know what you're going to get out of them. They could be flipping off the camera, because they're not normal kids. They're rough. And so I remember saying, okay, my father set it up, and so we put it together. And I remember, I donated 50 grand to the home, and then they matched it. They matched 50 grand. I think that's the first time they ever did it. And then, of course, I think now they're obviously doing it now, but I was the first one that actually started doing that, and they jumped on board and matched it when I was doing it. And so I remember, they came in and filmed it, and it was. I think it wasn't what people expected to see. They expected to see these kids in eating and doing all these things. They did. It was an eye opener because they lived in the back of a trailer truck. There was no showers. There was no bathrooms. It was in a dirt area. There was a river running through this area where they bathed at. There was an adobe hut with no roof on it. It had 4 bedrooms. That was where people stayed when they were good. They had 8 beds in this truck trailer, and they were lined up. And then they had a desk sitting in the front where the person on staff would be there making sure everybody was doing what they were supposed to be doing. And I remember for me, it was a shocker because where I came from, you couldn't do that. I mean, government or, CPS were like, yeah, we're not letting you do that to kids. But in Puerto Rico, they were in heaven because they got at least 2 square meals a day, and they had a place to sleep, and they had a place to actually learn. So I remember UFC doing that, and it was, like I said, it was one of those things where I thought that it really kind of started moving me into the direction that I wanted to go also, and UFC jumping on supported that. I remember opening a group home in Lodi, California, when I actually moved from San Diego to Lodi after we had started the den and started growing. And I remember we opened a home for 8 boys, so I was constantly doing it for at least 5 to 7 years, I believe, when I first started fighting in the UFC. We because of that one trip, it gave us an opportunity because of the coverage that it got, which wasn't what we were really looking for, but it felt like now we were in a position to where, because of that, my dad actually did it his whole life, and that's where I came from. We could actually get back into it. My dad could run it. I could train, and I could come in and work with the boys. With the status that I had, I could do so much more for these kids because they would listen to me.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. After that fight that you had with Hoist, What was that like for you, man? I mean, what was the preparation like coming back to the UFC? The first one. The first one. I know you said it was. I know you said it was humbling. I'm just curious what that was like in the head after going through that process.
It wasn't, because I just went over and defended my title, knocked the guy out in 4 or 5 minutes with a knee, knocked him out. It was Fouquet. I knocked him out, retained the title, get on a plane. We flew out. And again, I don't remember if I went home or if I went directly. I couldn't tell you, but I knew it was, fast. And so I get there, and I never, like I said before, none of it registered to me, like legitimacy. It just didn't register. And so the whole time I didn't practice. I trained for my fight. I won. I get there. I'm not sold that this is going to happen.
Right.
And I'm willing to walk away. Like, I'm willing to, if they're asking me to do something that is going to jeopardize, what I built, I'm not doing. I'll walk away. And so I was willing to do that, and even brought guys from Japan to represent me, to make sure that we weren't getting into a stupid situation because of the way it was being billed. And there's just no way with what we were doing. We couldn't do this in the United States, but we're doing it in Japan. But the United States wouldn't let us do what we were doing in Japan. So how in the hell are they going to let us do this? And so it just none of it registered, but we get there and things are just moving along like they're going to. When we did the rules meeting is when I really understood that this was really happening. And again, rules meeting with no rules. We realized, okay, this happened.
I can't help but laugh, because I mean, been there, watched all that, and being a part of it. You really wish they would have took more behind the scenes footage of, especially of that early era, because it was first time for all this stuff. I mean, each time that some new question would come into play or something like that,
Yeah, it was a Wild West, man, for sure.
On a more comical note here, but I don't know if I regaled this. Did I tell you about the one-legged man that I helped get into an MMA match?
No.
Again, this is not a joke. This is not a joke.
I was waiting for that punchline. He's like, "No, this is serious." Okay, now my ears perked up now.
No, I had a guy that came to my training facility down in Coldwater, Michigan, and he always wore sweatpants all the time, and it'd be hot and miserable stuff like that, but he always wore sweatpants. And one day I had them doing some kind of a drill or whatever like that, and in the process, and he always wore wrestling shoes. Again, which I wore wrestling shoes all the time until the point that they said no longer can you wear shoes, and then I took them off. But then in this one little drill, all of a sudden his bottom portion of his leg came off. And the guy that was, I think they're doing like a wheelbarrow or something like that with each other. And when he did his little tuck to go to roll, the guy still was standing there holding his leg. He had a prosthetic that went from the knee joint down. And the guy freaks out. He throws the leg. And the guy that's missing the leg, he's embarrassed by all this. And I go over and I diffuse the whole situation. Now I'm talking to the gentleman that is missing the part of his leg. And I go, "Why did you tell us?" He says, "I said he was afraid that I would not train him." I go, I'll have no problem training you. I said, the problem is you are not going to be allowed to wear a prosthetic into a cage. I said, because it's a weapon. It doesn't feel anything. You can use it like a billy club and because again, it's desensitized. It's just an attachment to you. I go, and I was running my own MMA company called Danger Zone. And I told him, I said, I will find you a match. I go, I don't know where or when, but I will find you a match. The hardest thing was because he was a rather big sized guy, and I was always trying to, for amateurs, I tried to keep it closer on the weight, stuff like that. I tried not to make it such a mismatch that I didn't want to see someone get really hurt really bad in the process. I said, if I'm able, I said, I will find you a match. But if I do find this match, you got to allow me to market it like this. I go, you've heard the expression before. I'm busier than a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. Well, tonight, folks, you really are going to see a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest.
So,
he started laughing. He
was okay with that.
Yeah, no, he did it. He did it, and it was advertised. And when the announcer was out there, on the queue lines, people were laughing, stuff like that. Didn't think he stood a chance because said, I go, you're interested. I go, you walk out there, big crowd with that prosthetic on. You climb up in that cage. I go, then you take that prosthetic off, and then you hand it out to your corner man, and then you hop over to your spot, and people are going to just lose their minds. And they did. Because like they had never seen something like that happen before. So
how do you do?
That's what I was wondering.
He won.
Oh wow.
Yeah, he won the match. I mean, he got knocked around a little bit there, but he was so good, at getting in clinches that whether he was going to fall down or try to take you down. I mean, he just once he hit the ground, he was a grappler. He was all over the guy at that point. He just had to get from point A to point B without taking leg shots and punches and things of that nature. So, and that's what again I just tell them. I mean, there's a whole science to fighting inside a cage. What you do out in the open, and there's in dead center of the octagon. It's the most solid portion of the base. So if you pick them and slam them, you either want to slam them in dead center or out along the peripheral edges because it's the strongest aspects of the cage. I remember going to my first UFC and I was there as they're setting up the cage because I'm watching how they're putting it together and I'm seeing these 10-foot long expansions out there. It's like a trampoline out in the middle of that, but then solid on the outside, solid in the center. It's like, okay, if I pick some up, I want to slam them in the center or I want to slam them on the outer peripheral just because if I can slam them, I don't want bounce and give. I want them to go poof, knock the wind out of them, that kind of a thing. but then even, using the cage wall, I did one. I don't know if you ever had or know what a Play-Doh machine is, where you put the Play-Doh in, and you squeeze it, and it kind of squishes out. I used octagon cage before, where I had a guy, his face was right up against the cage wall. I put my head right up on the side, grabbed the cage nugget in the cage, and just pressed right in there, and to where like the guy taps on out. He's got chain link indentations on the side of his face, and the referee's like going, "Who thinks that way?" I go, "Well, I do."
You use what you can.
Yeah.
No, that's right. So I
got to ask Ken this.
Oh, go ahead.
When we're in Detroit, when you and I were in Detroit, you had a mount on me for like, I don't know, say 6, maybe 7 minutes. You had a full mount on me.
Yeah.
And again, you did not at that time. You did not break. Just to stand people up for restarts of that nature. I mean, basically, you either fight out of it or you're going to get beat in the process.
Yeah, remember, and I never punched you either.
No, but Big John McCarthy is wandering around. I see his feet right off the side, and I have like underhooks on you, and I keep my head tucked in close to your chest, stuff like that, so that each time that you try to rear up to do a palm shot or something like that, you have to lift my body up. So I was trying to do like a reverse parasite. I'm trying to make you have to lift up more weight, stuff like that. Well, I see big John McCarthy's feet right there, and I duck right under your lat, and I look right up at him. I go, "It's a hell of a way to make a buck," and I went right back underneath him. John he starts shaking his head because I pulled off a couple little one-liners with him over the course of. Each time I knew I had him in, it's kind of like going, well, he expects something else. I don't know what I'm going to do right now, but I'll give him something somewhere along the way here to entertain him with. So,
yeah, I've done that a few times to break the ice. Yeah.
So I'm curious, man. You was talking about the ring earlier. So I saw this thing that was talking about at one point in time, they were talking about having like the ring above swimming sharks or something like that. There was so many different things that was going on. Could you guys talk about like some of the behind the scenes, because it got crazy in the beginning?
Yeah, but because of where me and Dan came from, that stuff probably, the shark thing was definitely a little bit wild, but because we came from that wrestling world, none of that stuff was weird, right? It's just it's an entertainment aspect. And when you hear stuff like that, you kind of in your first mind is like, that would be different. Even like with barbed wire. I mean, I've heard people in the shoot world say that they want to make the actual cage itself be laced with barbed wire so people wouldn't be using the cage. And it just, I thought to myself, that's pretty dangerous, because the person going into the cage most of the time may not be able to control their body going backwards because they're getting shot on. And they could literally fall and then slice their body up and down because they're falling into the fence.
Yeah.
So there's pretty stupid stuff that you would hear, because a lot of the guys were putting it together never fought.
Yeah. Well, on the same note there, Ken, the fencing that they had on the cage walls was a plastic coated. I mean, normal fencing does not have plastic onto it. So when you look at a normal fence, and if you ran your hand across a normal fence, it has little barbs that stick out there. That, I mean, if they would use normal fencing, it would tear your back right on up. Again, just like what you said before, just being taken down as you slide on down the cage wall, it would just tear you up. So the UFC has always had a plastic coated fencing that they used. The only thing that I thought was wrong is the fence only went up 6 foot high. So, and it was not good for the camera that was outside the cage shooting a big shot. If you got all these 6 foot tall guys that are going there, all you're going to see like this bar that's across their head. I know, like when I made my cage, I made it 8 foot high so that all you're going to see is the little chain linking, and you can shoot right through the chain linking. But I had a crow's nest that you could mount on the outside of one of the corners, because I made a square box because UFC had a patent on the octagon cage. So it's like, okay, can't make an octagon, but I'll just, square cage. They've been around forever. I'll just make a square cage, and easier to set up, easier to take down, but then easier to attach a crow's nest, stuff like that. So you could have someone that could shoot a camera above, and then you could have a hard camera from back shooting through the cage wall because you don't see nothing. So,
Right.
But that's what's called being an industrial arts major.
Another thing I was thinking about, we've talked about several times, Dan, I don't know if it was UFC 7, but what was the one like where you guys was having a really tough time with the commission, and they called you before and said, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this?
That was Detroit when I think they were, again, correct me if I'm wrong there, Ken, but I think that the UFC was in court up until like 5 o'clock that afternoon. And we're all just sitting around waiting in our little designated rooms, even though they're just curtains beside each other, but they're just curtain type of rooms. But and then by the time they come back, they're saying all they say is that you cannot do. And then, but I had this rapport with John already, towards like he knows that I'm going to ask questions. And he says, so when he says that you'll be penalized, I go, well, again, how many warnings before you get penalized? He says 7. He goes, you will be warned. So I end up going out there watching, I think, match number 1. And I think it was Cal Worsham. I forget who he was going against, but it's like headbutt after headbutt. And I kept seeing John go, warning, warning, warning. And I'm thinking, geez, oh, Pete, I need an adding machine to count up how many times that Cal is throwing these headbutts right now. But so far, I don't see no penalties being here. I'm thinking, well, let's just see how this goes here. All I know is that, has the UFC ever made it back to Detroit since that time? Nope.
No, I think I was focused more on Canada and what happened a week before.
Yes,
our event, and
the jail guys taken right to jail. Yes.
We literally took the main event and the semi-main event, and because they did the same thing in Canada, saying that you guys could do the event, but you can't punch. Well, the organization basically did the same thing UFC was going to do. They're just going to warn the fighters. And they ended up arresting the guys that were in the main event and semi-main event, and that was just a week before Detroit.
Yeah.
And we were being put in that same position. And if it wasn't for the fact that I had a group home for kids and I was preaching to them to follow the rules, you can do whatever you want. I'm an example of that you can be angry and frustrated, and you can take that anger and frustration out into something positive and play within those rules. You can accomplish whatever you want. But the minute you cross over and do it outside those boundaries, you lose everything. Yeah. You can't do that. And then all of a sudden, here I am. And again, if it hadn't been from the group home, or if it hadn't been from the, this thing that I was building and the way that I had been preaching and kind of how I became successful in my life of following the rules and staying within those rules, and I can beat the shit out of anybody I want as long as I stay within the rules. But I go outside of that, man, and I already know what's going to happen. And so that's all that was running through my head was I got this far. And now I'm being challenged because I'm being told by the owners, don't worry about it. And I'm like, what do you mean don't worry about it? Isn't it or isn't it illegal? They're like, no, it is, but we're just not going to act on it right away. And I'm like, so you're telling me to break the rules? And again, like I said, if it wasn't for, how and where I got to where I was at because of how I did it, it was real difficult for me to do that. And so that's why when me and Dan went into that fight, I refused to punch him. Not because I didn't want to, but it was because I knew that the world was watching. I knew that those kids at home were watching. I knew all those kids that I had worked with and that I preached to them, because that was my main focus when I talk with at-risk kids, was to be able to accomplish whatever they want, but you got to know the rules first and then stay within those rules. And it was everything that I was. And I just could not bring myself to break those rules because I didn't know. Now, if I known that they wouldn't have done anything about it, then it would have been different, right? But I didn't know that, and so I had to go against what I thought was the best move at that point.
You guys can tell me, but because it's been a while since I've watched it, but did they tell anybody before that match that you guys had that special set of rules that you were having to abide by when you went into that?
Yeah, that was something that Big John went to every locker room area and told everyone that was participating in that event. But it was on an individual basis. There was no like group meeting. He just went into each room. This is based upon today's court case. This is what has to happen.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Dan. I meant like, did they tell the audience that there was this new set of rules? No, because you're sitting there, you're getting the booze and all this different stuff, and it's a reflection on you guys, but they don't know what you're having to deal with on the back end.
Right. Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And you got to remember too, if I didn't believe, and again I believed that if this was to happen because of who we were, Dan was a rising star, fast rising star. I was a star. If they were going to make an example out of anyone, it was going to be us. And we were not in favor with the commission. And everything that was in my bones told me that we were going to get arrested. Everything in my bones because of what they did in Canada. And those guys didn't have the reputation or the stardom that we had. And I just thought to myself, we're going to be made examples of. And I truly believe that. But it didn't happen, but I believed it. I believed that was going to happen.
Yeah.
How close was the UFC to getting shut down back then? Because from what I could, what I've heard, it seems like they were doing everything in their power to really make sure that you guys couldn't do these events anymore.
I would say, it was 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Yeah.
And I believe that they did shut it down. But because of the Fertitas in Dana, they came in and actually revived it because we were done.
Just to play on what Ken's saying there. I mean, the UFC was bleeding money at that point in time. And, I think one of the best things was the fact that the sell of the UFC from one ownership, then over to the Fertitas and with Dana White. And then they, there was a strong boxing background, but you also had the casino background. You had more. Yeah, I think you had a deeper pocket, but then they made Las Vegas their showcase home for this, to where it's when you fast forward to today, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, for what it has been built to. And you look at what Ken, when you look at the guarantees, some of these main eventers are getting just to show up. It's like going, wow.
It was embarrassing for these guys, some of these guys, to show up and get paid what they got paid. It just didn't make sense. But again, then I'm not on the side of the promoter. I am now, but I understand it a little bit more. But at the same time, still, there's no way that you just cannot go and put on something like that and not take care of the ones that are actually doing the work.
Yeah, and then you got to look too. I mean, like, you guys was fighting 3-4 fights a night as well. So the amount of damage that you was putting your bodies through, entertaining the people and competing, and then that pay. I don't know. I mean, what was it like compared? What was the pay like in MMA compared to what you guys were getting in pro wrestling? Was pro wrestling more lucrative? I'm curious.
I would say, for me, it's hard to put that tag on it, because in wrestling, or at least when I got into the WWF, we worked, 200 days out of the year. So when you put the amount of money that you get paid for,
right,
in pro wrestling, which was a lot. I mean, I got paid a lot, but when you add all those days together with that money, it doesn't average out to a lot, because that's 200 days a year as opposed to 16 days to 24 days a year in MMA.
That definitely makes sense. That makes sense. When did you first hear about this opportunity with WWF, Ken?
It was after I had gone back for I had agreed upon a certain amount of money to be the face of the UFC at that time. And so that year I went out, I did everything. I held up to my agreement. Everything was good. I was still fighting over in Japan. And so they were cross promoting. In fact, I even brought Japan, because of the success I was having in the UFC. They crossed over into the US and did a pay-per-view with the Pancreas organization. So there was a bridge going on there early on when I was involved with the UFC, and I was the face of both organizations at the time. And I had the Lions Den, and a lot of the stuff was just really, really rolling for me. But then when it got to to up my contract with the UFC and my agreement with the Pancreas organization, it came around at the same time, whereas Pancreas wanted me to stop the UFC and focus on the fight, being a trainer, bringing in fighters, and, fighting just for them. And I looked at him and said, I can't do that. I said, this is a different level, and this is more challenging. I just can't walk away from it now. And so there was some inner workings that went on, and I ended up walking away, which I had every right to do. I walked away. I put Guy Mesger in charge of it for the Lions Den, and I started focusing on the UFC. Well, 6 months later, the contract came up with the with the UFC, and that's when we did the Detroit thing. Every time they went somewhere, they were in court prior to the event, because they would legalize it. They would start marketing it. The week of the fight, fighters would start showing up. Press would start showing up. Some politician would come down with pickets and this and that, and they would try to block it. Then they'd have to go to court, because they would say, okay, you can't do it here, even though they already told them they could, and they already paid the money. And then they would have to go to court to get it reinstated again. And that was a lot of money that Bob Meyerowitz was burning through, because everywhere he went, he was fighting some women's thing or some men's thing, or, some rights movement. It just felt like it was a constant battle, and they were constantly in court every single time they put on a fight. And it just got to a point where they were just burning through money. And so when my time came up to re-up, I had built this world, of I had a fighter's house, and I had fighters living in it. I had a boys' home for at-risk kids. that was there. And then, obviously I had 3 different gyms, a weight gym, a grappling gym, and a boxing gym. So I had this thing that I had built, this world that I had built, and I could not finance that without the money that I needed for this raise. Like this was coming to me. And I literally, with the hindsight that this was happening, and it didn't, they weren't going to give me the raise. And then I decided, okay, well, they were going to give me the same amount, which wasn't bad. But with what I was promised and what I was doing at the time, I wasn't just in the ring fighting. I was outside the ring as a spokesperson, doing a lot of extra stuff with that intention of other things happening. And it didn't happen. And I wasn't angry. Myris wasn't angry. It's just the way it was because of what they were going through, not what I was going through, but what they were going through. I had to make a decision on whether or not I was going to cancel the Fighter's House, cancel the group home, because I was paying for all of that, and just focus on me. And just I could make it. It was just me and my family. And I realized after thinking about it for a while, looking at my brother Frank and Jerry Bolender and Pete Williams and Joe Hurley and all these guys that were living and training and living their dream out. These group home kids that if I shut that down, they're going back in the system. I just looked at it and I felt like I couldn't do that to them. Like I could not be selfish enough to just think about me. And I felt like, okay, I'm going to do something else with the idea that I'm coming back. Like I just need to be able to weather this storm of what's happening because I can't get the money I need, but I'm going to go do something else to try to find out whether or not I can still keep everything running. And fortunately for me, I got a call from Vince McMahon after my agent reached out to New Japan, Old Japan, everywhere, because I had a wrestling background. I felt like I could bring those skills into this entertainment world. And fortunately for me, Vince reached out very quickly. Things happened very fast, and he gave me almost triple of what I was going to get in my up and coming guaranteed contract.
Oh, wow.
So I was blessed. I mean, it worked out. I was able to keep everybody training, all the stuff up and going. And I got to keep my name out there. I got to really build a bigger brand with the Lion's Den and the Ken Shamrock brand. And so I felt like once I did that, when I did it, it was brutal because people would call me a sellout. It was a lot of hate. Even half my gym, my brother Frank ended up leaving with some bad blood between myself and my dad, a different issue, but nevertheless, I believe there's a catapult because I wasn't there. I lost half my gym because those guys turned on me, and I never once told them why I did what I did, because I felt like they didn't need that burden of why I was doing this. Right. I felt like this was something that I knew was the right thing to do. And they didn't need to know why I was doing it because I didn't want to put any pressure on anybody. But they ended up turning on me, half of them, and ended up doing other things. And that was fine. I mean, I understood that they felt like this was betrayal because I was supposed to be there. And that was the whole effort and work and everything they put in was because they did it because they believed in me. And I wasn't necessarily walking away, but to them, I was walking away. So I understood that part. But things went on. And I remember getting into wrestling, and half the press was excited. Half the press was finding a way to try to bury me. But I just kept my head down. I knew what I was doing. I knew that I had some ability. Whether I was going to make it or not, I didn't know that. But I did it anyways. I could have lost it all, my brand, my reputation, everything, if it didn't work out. But I felt like it was my only choice, really, without being selfish. And so I went into that direction. Obviously we know how it worked out. I was very happy, and it was successful. And we're here today. I mean, and I have a great reputation. I have a great career in both. I really enjoyed both. But it wasn't, when I first went into it, it wasn't like I was going to stay. I was there just to be able to fill the void. unfortunately, not unfortunately, but fortunately for me and unfortunately for me, I fell in love with it. And unfortunately, why I say unfortunate is because a lot of other people who believed in me and trusted me and wanted me to come back, I stayed longer because I loved it. I enjoyed it even more at that level. And I was able to keep everything up and running, and I did for many, many years.
Yeah. And you guys might not be able to answer this, but I've always wondered, why did we never get Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn in the WWE? I mean, it would seem like that was the reason they had both of you guys there, and it was the most obvious feud, and it never happened. It seems like somebody dropped the ball on that one.
I said we were together in different facets because there was always like an Owen Hart and a Blackman, Steve Blackman, and then Ken and myself. Seemed like that we were known as the four different shooters in the group, and there had some little intermix type of things here and there. But again, I had a very unique contract, just the same way that Ken did. So I don't really feel like they had a true harness around me. To me, it was the easiest money I ever made was working for them, because it was I knew I had my planner. I knew what was coming up when I had to do things, but then I would set up other things on top of that. I would fly in earlier and maybe do a seminar or speaking engagement. And then I go to the arena and then do the match with them. And then afterwards I'd go to a sports bar or someplace else and either do another that. So in the same 24 hours it's gone, I'm pulling down a couple of different paychecks instead of just one. Because I was older, for Vince to sign me on. I mean, I think it was 48 at the time. So it was like, if he would have known how old
that didn't matter because people looked at you like you were a beast. Nobody even thought of an age. You were Dan Severn. You're the beast, and age never really even was a factor to anyone. I think that and again, I've heard this many times and I'm starting to believe it. I just don't think they knew what to do with us. I mean, they knew what to do. They do now, obviously, because you see these guys come in and they're literally playing characters of us. I mean, they're literally playing characters of us. And so they just didn't understand what they had. And I've heard many writers say this, that they had a gold mine and they just didn't know what to do with it.
Right. Yep.
I agree with that.
I agree there as well there, Ken. No, well said. Well said.
Ken, let me ask you, what are you doing with the pro wrestling business now? Are you still doing matches?
No. I'm done.
Are you?
I can say I'm blessed because I'm in good shape. I mean, I'm great. But I also know that I'm not anywhere, not even close to what I used to be. And I've seen too many times where I see people go in and do these different types of special matches and people feel sorry for them when they go in there and they do a match. And I was like, that's not me. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, because it never lives up to the potential of what they want it to. Ever, and you see them in the ring for just a little bit. It's a gimmick to make some money, but it kind of takes advantage of the fans in a way.
Well, and you can't do it. I mean, like, as much as I believe I can go in there and beat the shit out of somebody, and I believe that I still have the ability to do that, but I don't look the same. I don't move the same. I don't have the same reactions. And if I go in and do something, even though I may be tough and gut it, I mean, I give you an example. Tito Ortiz. I fought him and I stayed in it and kept fighting him because I always believed I could beat him. Like, I know that I can I'll figure it out. And it just got worse each and every time. And that's when it was like, okay. Okay, this isn't getting better. This is continually getting worse. And I've never in my entire life been able to overcome. I've been able to overcome anything. I could get beat, come back and win. This I knew was father time, and you ain't beating that. You're just not doing it.
Yeah, that's okay. I would say that's the undefeated opponent, father time. Yes.
Yep.
Slowly.
I'm okay with that. Yeah. I'm okay with that because Father Time's beating everyone. I'm okay with that.
I understand, man. I do got to pay you a compliment, though. I mean, when we booked this and I knew you was coming on, I went and watched one of your last matches in TNA. I think it was against Moose. And I've been years since I saw you. I was like, Ken can still go, man. I mean, that was one of the better matches I had seen in a long time.
Yeah, but even when I look at it, I'm like, I'm not enjoying it. I'm literally having to work too hard to look good. It's not fun having to work that hard to look that good. It's not fun anymore. I just don't.
I understand that.
Yeah. Well, there just comes that time in everyone's life where you got to move along, and there's a lot of professional wrestlers that they stay too long, but it's because of the things that they did not do in their career a little bit earlier. Like Ken was saying there earlier, the fact that you've salted money away, you take care of your body and stuff of that nature, so that the professional wrestling industry is a very unforgiving industry, and all the bumps that you'll take, and a lot of the professional wrestlers, they get hung up on just painkillers and muscle relaxers, something to get them up, get them going in the morning, something to put them down at night, and then, well, one doesn't work, maybe two works better, and then okay, if I wash it down with alcohol or something like that, it helps to soothe it that much more. I mean, it's just a vicious, ugly cycle, and eventually you find out someone passed away, and it's kind of sad.
The sad part about that, because I got caught into that, I would say when I was probably my 39 and 40, I had knee surgery. I mean, I had my knee replaced, and I fought on it for years, even with Tito.
You had your knee joint replaced at the time?
Well, I had it rebuilt.
Okay.
And I fought on it because I had torn the ACL, and I didn't go do what I needed to do, and it got really bad. I'm not going to go into details.
Okay.
So I remember fighting Tito, and part of the agreement when me and Dana had talked was that I couldn't do it right away because I had to get knee surgery. At that time, it was shredded, right? It hadn't been completely torn. It was shredded, and I just got done with my deal over in Pride, and I was having issues with it. And so I figured, okay, my contract is up there. I did my 3 fights. I'm going to take some time off. I'm going to get it fixed and then evaluate whether or not I'm going to keep going. Well, that's when I got approached by Dana and asked if I wanted to fight Tito. And I was like, yes, because it was always in my head that I wanted to fight him because of some of the things that went on earlier on. And I'm a fighter. And when you ask a fighter if you want to fight, it's like you don't think about what's going on with you. You don't think about whether you have the date open or not, or if you got a contract with somebody else. You immediately say yes without thinking about your other obligations. And that's really what happened. Was I just immediately said yes. Well, then I went back to, well, we need to push this off a little bit because I need to get my knee fixed. And like I said, at this time it was shredded. It hadn't been torn. It was shredded. And
that's actually almost worse, because usually if you simply just tear something, it's cut dry on that, but when it's shredded, you have to really baby step it along.
Well, and two, it's when it does pop, that's the swelling and everything else comes in, right? That's the worst part happens because then you finish it off, and you hope that it doesn't completely go, which is kind of what happened after a period of time. Because I didn't go in and fix it. And Dana said, well, we need to have this fight. Again, I don't remember the exact words, but they were pushing for the fight to happen soon. He says, can you hold it? Because I told him it was shredded, it's not going to be torn. I fought on it already. But I need to get it fixed, or say it's going to tear, and then it's going to be a whole nother thing if it gets to a point where you blow it completely out.
Yep.
And so I remember him just pushing, saying, we got to do the fight, this and that. So I agreed to it, and I did it. And, I'm not going into any of this because it's not fair to Tito, right? But Tito was an explosive fighter, and he won. But again, like I said, those are things like that when you're not. And again, that's why I say, this thing, we're getting in the ring, you feel healthy, you feel strong, but you ain't the same. It's not the same. And you can't trick yourself into thinking that it is.
Yeah. It's got to be hard to walk away from when that's all you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It is, because it wasn't, I did it because I made money at it. I did it because I loved it. And I loved the transition. I went from being a pro wrestler to hybrid pro wrestling to the shoot part of the Pancras organization into the UFC, and the transition of no holds barred and anything goes into the sanctioning body part of the UFC. I mean, I was through that whole era, and it was something that I felt like was my child. I loved it, and I never wanted to leave it. And then I got into wrestling, and I did it because I thought I needed to make money. I did wrestling because I needed the money to be able to keep everything I was doing up and running, and be able to have all these other people fulfill their dreams at the same time and keep my dreams going. And so I did that. But the thing is, I fell in love with that. I was like, wow, this is like, because it's wrestling's not easy. It's a lot to it to be successful. And I know a lot of people say, oh, it's fake. It's not fake. It's choreographed, it's entertaining, but it's tough. And so I just, like I said, I think it's just one of those things where you just got to, you can't doubt yourself on whether you can or cannot. You got to know exactly what it is that you're capable of doing by what you've been doing, period.
What are you doing nowadays? Are you still training with the kids? Curious.
Yeah, I'm a lot of things. I raise palm skis, something me and my wife do. I also have.
Is that a dog? Is that a dog?
Yeah.
Again, I never heard of this breed or whatever. I mean, so I was like, what's
it's a husky with the Pomeranian mix.
Oh, okay. Wow! How big does it get?
Well, they average, because you can get ones that are size of a husky that is literally looks like what a horse looks like and then a pony looks like. Yeah. Well, that's what Pomeranians are. They look like huskies, but they're like small, like Pomeranians.
Oh man. Yeah. I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, so we're doing that's just fun stuff we're doing, but I've got a business now with OFL, so a bare knuckle league we're doing. We're in the process. I've done two fights, went through some business structure, as everything does when you first start out. You some people stay, some people go, especially if you're successful and it's growing. A lot of the people that you start with aren't going to be there when you get to that next level, because you're always improving in the structure of your business, or you should be if you want to stay for a long time. You're always improving the different clientele, the different fighters, that as you grow, you're always bringing in better. And that's kind of where we're at. We've literally just aligned with some great partners that are in the casino business. We've got guys that are in the boat business that build big structures and stuff like that. So it's fun right now. I'm learning a lot. I would rather fight, tell you the truth, than
people don't understand that there's a lot of work behind the scenes. There's a lot of work, and you got to organize a lot of different people. Do you have a date for your next event here yet, Ken?
No, we have a target right now, but we're not going to say anything because, like I said, a lot of stuff can happen. I've learned this, in my short period of time.
Oh yeah.
Won't put the cart before the horse.
Well, don't want to be, conscious of your time and all your other commitments you have to do here yet today. Maybe when you finally do have a time frame when this is going to take place, if you'd like to come on the show again, to where we could do some promotional work to talk about the upcoming show, some of the athletes that are going to be on there, and if you want to have one or two athletes that we can get in contact with to help promote their fights and the whole aspect right there. Simply just to do something good and positive for you there as well.
Yeah, that like I said, any kind of stuff that we can get the OFL brand out there, we'd love to do it.